She hadn't planned to be there that day. She had simply shown up to watch the training exercises. An ordinary spectator standing on the edge of a Marine reconnaissance training facility where families and guests were sometimes allowed to observe. Her frame was slight, her demeanor quiet, and to most who noticed her, she looked like just another civilian. The morning sun cast long shadows across the obstacle course as she found a spot along the chain-link fence. Around her, other spectators clustered in small groups, wives checking their phones while keeping one eye on the training, parents visiting their sons during the grueling selection process, a few retired veterans with weathered faces and knowing eyes. She kept her hands tucked into the pockets of her lightweight jacket, standing still as the sounds of commands and exertion carried over the training grounds. The candidates were being pushed through their paces, grueling obstacle runs that left men gasping, endless repetitions that tested both body and will. The bone-numbing cold of pre-dawn water training that separated the determined from the desperate. The crowd of onlookers whispered about how brutal it looked, how impossible it seemed to keep going under such relentless pressure. Parents winced when they saw their sons struggle. Wives exchanged worried glances when candidates stumbled or fell behind the pace. Through it all, she watched in silence. Her eyes tracked the movements with an attention that went beyond casual interest. While others focused on individual struggles, she observed the patterns, the methods, the systematic approach to breaking down and rebuilding human endurance. To the recruits fighting through their trials, she was invisible background noise. To the officers overseeing training, she was just someone's relative waiting patiently. Her unremarkable presence drew no attention, raised no questions, triggered no second glances. The training facility itself buzzed with purposeful activity. Instructors moved between stations with clipboard precision. Medical personnel stood ready for the inevitable injuries that came with pushing human limits. Support staff coordinated logistics with military efficiency. She absorbed it all without comment, her expression neutral but her eyes alert. Something in the way she held herself suggested patience, born of discipline rather than casual waiting. The kind of stillness that comes not from boredom but from learned control. The candidates were being pushed to their limits. Grueling obstacle runs through mud that clung like concrete. Endless push-ups that turned arms to jelly and backs to fire. The bone-chilling test of cold water endurance that made grown men question every decision that brought them to this place. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez barked commands that echoed off the concrete walls. His voice carried the authority of someone who had survived what these candidates were only beginning to experience. Drop and give me 50. Move faster. Your enemy won't wait for you to catch your breath. The obstacle course stretched like a medieval torture device across the training ground. Rope climbs that burned palms raw. Wall traverses that demanded upper body strength most civilians never developed. Crawls under barbed wire through sand that found its way into every piece of gear and clothing. She watched as candidate after candidate struggled through the gauntlet. Some moved with natural athleticism that made the impossible look merely difficult. Others fought for every inch, their faces twisted with determination and pain. A few had already fallen behind, their dreams crumbling with their physical capabilities. The instructors showed no mercy. This was selection, not training. The point was not to teach, but to reveal, to strip away pretense and discover who possessed the rare combination of physical capability and mental toughness that special operations demanded. Water training proved the most brutal equalizer. Candidates dropped into pools wearing full gear, required to perform complex tasks while fighting their body's natural panic response. Some emerged gasping, but successful. Others were pulled out by safety divers, their selection process ended by involuntary surrender to basic survival instincts. Medical personnel stood ready with stretchers and emergency equipment. Injuries were inevitable when pushing human performance to extremes. Twisted ankles, torn muscles, occasionally more serious trauma that required immediate evacuation. the price of discovering who could handle the unthinkable. The crowd of spectators reacted with mixture of admiration and horror. This was their first glimpse into a world most would never understand. The systematic process of identifying individuals capable of operating beyond normal human limitations under conditions that would break ordinary people. She observed it all with the steady focus of someone reading a familiar book. Her eyes tracked not just the candidates, but the methods, the progression, the careful calibration of stress designed to reveal character under pressure. Master Sergeant James Mitchell stood at the edge of the training ground, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the brutal selection process with practiced assessment. At 42, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced real combat and survived to teach others. His uniform was immaculate despite the humid morning heat, every ribbon and badge earned through deployments most people would never comprehend. Mitchell had seen 3 wars and countless training cycles. His weathered face bore the lines of someone who had made life and death decisions in places that existed only in classified reports. The scars on his hands told stories of operations that would never appear in history books. His eyes, sharp and constantly moving, missed nothing. This morning's selection was routine for him. Another group of hopefuls trying to prove they belonged among the elite. Most would fail, as they always did. The statistics were brutal and unchanging. Less than 20% would complete the program. Even fewer would survive the advanced training that followed. He watched candidates struggle through obstacle courses designed to break both body and spirit. His expression remained neutral, but internally he was conducting constant evaluation. Not just physical performance, but mental resilience, leadership under stress, the indefinable quality that separated warriors from soldiers. The crowd of spectators barely registered on his consciousness. Family members were part of the process, their presence both motivation and distraction for struggling candidates. He had learned to tune out their gasps and worried murmurs, focusing instead on the subtle signs that revealed true character under pressure. Mitchell's radio crackled with updates from other instructors positioned around the training area. Medical station reports, timing updates, the occasional request to remove a candidate who had reached his breaking point. The systematic process of elimination that would continue for weeks. His trained eye automatically cataloged details that civilians would miss. Which candidates helped struggling teammates without being ordered? Who maintained composure when everything went wrong? The rare individuals who seemed to thrive under conditions that crushed others. 26 years of military service had taught him to read people with surgical precision. Body language revealed more than words. Reactions under stress exposed true nature. The way someone handled failure predicted how they would perform when lives depended on their decisions. Something at the edge of his vision caught his attention. Mitchell's gaze swept across the gathered spectators with routine efficiency. Parents clutching coffee cups and checking phones. Wives shifting uncomfortably in folding chairs. A few veterans whose bearing gave away their military background, even in civilian clothes. Nothing unusual about the morning crowd. His attention returned to the training until something made him look again. A woman standing alone near the fence line, hands tucked in her jacket pockets, watching the proceedings with unusual intensity. At first glance, she appeared unremarkable. Average height, quiet demeanor, the kind of person who blended into backgrounds without effort. But something about her stillness caught his trained eye. While other spectators shifted, talked, reacted to the brutal exercises, she remained motionless with the kind of controlled awareness he recognized from his own experience. The way she held herself suggested discipline rather than casual interest. Mitchell dismissed the observation and returned to his clipboard. Candidate evaluations demanded his full attention. Performance metrics, injury reports, psychological assessments. The systematic documentation that would determine who advanced and who went home. Yet his eyes kept drifting back to the woman by the fence. There was something familiar about her posture, the way she observed without appearing to watch. Professional recognition stirring in the back of his mind like a half-remembered name. She stood with weight evenly distributed, shoulders square but not rigid. Her head moved with small, precise adjustments that maximized her field of vision. These were subtle details that most people would miss, but Mitchell had spent decades learning to read body language as a survival skill. The crowd around her provided perfect camouflage. Anxious family members created enough distraction to make her near invisibility complete. Yet something about the contrast bothered him. Everyone else displayed obvious emotional investment in the proceedings. She watched with the detached professionalism of someone conducting assessment rather than showing support. Mitchell tried to focus on his duties, but found himself glancing in her direction more frequently. Training had taught him to trust instincts, especially when something felt off. His subconscious was processing details his rational mind hadn't yet cataloged. When she shifted position slightly, moving closer to get a better view of the water training evolution, Mitchell caught a glimpse of something that made him freeze. Just a flash of ink visible at her wrist where the jacket sleeve had pulled back. The tattoo was barely visible, a flash of dark ink against pale skin before her sleeve settled back into place. But in that brief moment, Mitchell's trained eye caught enough detail to make his blood run cold. The distinctive outline was unmistakable. A crossed rifle and anchor surrounded by a specific pattern he had seen only once before in classified briefings that haunted his memory. His clipboard slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering against the concrete. Around him, the brutal selection process continued, but Mitchell was no longer present in that moment. His mind had transported back to a secure briefing room where he had learned about operations that officially never happened. The tattoo belonged to survivors of Operation Silent Thunder, a classified mission that had taken place in hostile territory under conditions so extreme that most details remained buried in Pentagon vaults. Only 7 operators had gone in. Only 3 had come back. The mission was spoken of in whispers among special operations communities, if mentioned at all. Mitchell knew the statistics because he had helped write the after-action reports. 18 days behind enemy lines without resupply. Constant pursuit by forces that outnumbered them 50-1. Conditions that pushed human endurance beyond documented limits. Most of the classified files would remain sealed for decades. The survivors have been given medals in private ceremonies with no media coverage. Their names appeared on no public rolls. The tattoo was their only acknowledgement, a mark that identified them to others who understood the weight of what they had endured. Each survivor had chosen the same design, carried in the same location, a permanent reminder of bonds forged through shared impossibility. Mitchell had met 2 of the 3 survivors during classified debriefs. Both were men, career operators whose faces carried the hollow look of those who had seen beyond normal human experience. He had never met the 3rd survivor, whose file contained only a name, a service record, and a psychological evaluation that recommended immediate administrative separation from active duty. Now, that 3rd survivor stood 50 feet away, disguised as an ordinary civilian watching routine training exercises. The woman whose existence he had questioned, whose survival had seemed impossible even to those who knew the classified details. She was real, alive, and close enough that he could have called her name if protocol had permitted. The implications crashed through his consciousness like artillery fire. If she was here, it meant something. People with her background didn't appear at random training exercises for casual observation. Operation Silent Thunder had begun as a routine reconnaissance mission in hostile territory. 7 elite operators inserted by helicopter under cover of darkness to gather intelligence on enemy positions. What should have been a 72-hour mission became 18 days of hell when their extraction was compromised and enemy forces surrounded their position. Mitchell remembered the classified briefings that followed. Radio silence for the first week while search and rescue assets were repositioned. Then fragmented communications reporting casualties, equipment failures, and pursuit by overwhelming enemy numbers. The operation had devolved into pure survival against impossible odds. The terrain worked against them. dense jungle that concealed enemy movement while exposing the Americans to constant ambush, rivers that had to be crossed under fire, mountains that offer concealment but no escape routes. Every mile toward friendly lines cost blood and equipment they couldn't spare. Enemy forces had mobilized entire regiments to hunt 7 people. Helicopter gunships, tracker teams, local militias pressed into service as beaters, driving the Americans toward prepared killing zones. The odds were beyond calculation, the pressure unrelenting, the margin for error non-existent. 2 operators died in the first ambush when their position was compromised. Another fell during a river crossing under heavy fire. A 4th was lost to infected wounds when medical supplies ran out. By day 12, only 3 remained from the original 7, still 40 miles from friendly territory. The psychological evaluation Mitchell had read painted a picture of trauma beyond normal combat experience. Sleep deprivation, malnutrition, constant fear, and the weight of watching teammates die had pushed the survivors to the edge of complete breakdown. They had continued moving through sheer will when their bodies demanded surrender. The final extraction had required a full-scale rescue operation. Airstrikes to suppress enemy positions. Special operations forces fighting through organized resistance. Medical helicopters standing by for casualties that everyone expected would include the missing operators. When they finally reached the survivors, rescue personnel found 3 people who had been reduced to their essential elements. Everything unnecessary had been burned away by 18 days of impossible choices and constant death. They moved like ghosts, spoke in whispers, and startled at sounds that reminded them of pursuit. The woman standing by the fence had endured every moment of that ordeal. She had watched teammates die, had killed enemies at close range, had made decisions that haunted the other survivors for years afterward. The quiet civilian observing training exercises carried scars that would never heal. Mitchell's mind raced through the implications of her presence. Protocol demanded he report any contact with classified personnel to higher headquarters. Security regulations prohibited acknowledgement of operations that officially never happened. Yet standing 50 feet away was living proof of events that existed only in sealed files. His hands trembled slightly as he bent to retrieve his dropped clipboard. 26 years of military training warred with human curiosity and professional respect. She had survived something that killed 4 of her teammates, had endured trials that broke hardened special operations veterans, had earned recognition that could never be publicly acknowledged. The woman continued watching the training exercises with the same quiet intensity, unaware that her carefully maintained anonymity had been compromised. Her presence raised questions that Mitchell wasn't authorized to ask. Was she here officially or personally? Had she been directed to observe these candidates, or was this coincidental? Every instinct told him this was not coincidence. People with her background and clearance level didn't accidentally stumble into military facilities. Her positioning, her timing, her professional observation of the selection process suggested purpose rather than casual interest. Someone had sent her, or she had come for reasons that went beyond curiosity. Mitchell struggled with competing loyalties. Military protocol demanded he maintain operational security by pretending ignorance. Human decency demanded acknowledgement of her service and sacrifice. Professional curiosity burned to understand why one of the most classified operators in American military history was watching routine training exercises. The tattoo created an impossible situation. Its existence proved classified operations that he wasn't supposed to know about. Her survival confirmed details that remained above his clearance level. Acknowledging recognition would violate security protocols that protected both their careers. Yet ignoring her presence felt like betrayal of everything the military claimed to represent. She had given more for her country than most people could imagine. Her teammates had died in service that would never be publicly honored. The least she deserved was recognition from someone who understood the weight of her sacrifice. Mitchell watched her from his peripheral vision while pretending to focus on candidate evaluations. Her stillness was absolute, her attention complete. She observed not as a spectator, but as a professional conducting assessment. The same way he evaluated candidates, she was studying something in these exercises that held significance beyond entertainment. The realization hit him like physical impact. She wasn't here to watch training. She was here to evaluate the candidates. The moment stretched between them like a taut wire. Mitchell found himself staring directly at her, all pretense of casual observation abandoned. Professional discipline crumbled under the weight of recognition and respect that transcended normal protocol. His eyes locked with hers across 50 feet of training ground. She noticed his attention immediately. Her head turned with the precise movement of someone trained to detect surveillance. When their gazes met, something passed between them that needed no words. Recognition, understanding, the silent acknowledgement that exists only between those who have faced the unthinkable. Her expression didn't change, but Mitchell caught the subtle shift in her posture. The almost imperceptible straightening that accompanied being seen by someone who understood. Not the casual recognition of strangers, but the deeper acknowledgement between warriors who carried similar scars. Mitchell felt his hand move toward his chest in an aborted gesture of respect. Military bearing demanded a salute, but circumstances prohibited any visible sign of recognition. The conflict between protocol and honor created physical tension that made his jaw clench and his shoulders rigid. Other Marines in the area sensed the change without understanding its source. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez glanced between Mitchell and the woman, noting the unusual intensity of their exchange. Instructors positioned around the training ground picked up on their commander's altered demeanor through peripheral awareness honed by years of reading tactical situations. The woman's response was equally subtle but unmistakable to someone with Mitchell's experience. The slight nod, barely more than a twitch of her chin, conveyed acknowledgement and permission. She had accepted his recognition while maintaining the protective anonymity that kept both their careers intact. No words were exchanged. No gestures that outside observers could interpret as anything beyond casual eye contact between strangers. Yet in that silent communication, volumes were spoken about service, sacrifice, and the bonds that connected those who had given everything for their country. The moment lasted perhaps 5 seconds before both returned to their respective roles. Mitchell forced his attention back to his clipboard while she resumed her quiet observation of the training exercises. But the atmosphere had shifted permanently. An invisible current of mutual respect now connected them across the divide of classification levels and operational security. Around them, the brutal selection process continued without pause. Candidates struggled through obstacles designed to break them. Instructors maintained relentless pressure. The systematic elimination of those who lacked the essential qualities for special operations proceeded with mechanical precision. The recognition between Mitchell and the woman created ripple effects that spread through the training environment like expanding circles on water. Other instructors noticed their commanders change demeanor without understanding its cause. His normal professional detachment had been replaced by something deeper, more intense, charged with significance they couldn't identify. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez approached cautiously, his experienced eyes reading the tension in Mitchell's posture. The Master Sergeant stood differently now, with the heightened awareness of someone who had identified a potential threat or opportunity. His grip on the clipboard had tightened, and his breathing had shifted to the controlled rhythm that preceded action. Even the candidates sensed the atmospheric change. Men pushed beyond their physical limits often developed heightened sensitivity to emotional undercurrents around them. The brutal selection process had stripped away psychological defenses, leaving them raw and receptive to subtle shifts in their environment. One candidate struggling through rope climbs paused to glance toward the fence line where the woman stood. Something about the way the instructors were positioned, the unusual intensity of their observation, suggested significance beyond routine training oversight. He couldn't identify the source, but survival instincts honed by weeks of relentless pressure warned him that something important was happening. The woman remained motionless, but her presence now carried weight that affected everyone within visual range. What had been invisible civilian background was transformed into a focal point that drew attention through sheer gravitational force of recognition and respect. Mitchell found himself reassessing everything about the morning's training evolution. Her positioning provided perfect oversight of the most challenging obstacles. Her timing coincided with evaluations that would determine which candidates advanced to the next phase. The professional quality of her observation suggested official rather than personal interest. Other Marines began noticing her as well, drawn by their commander's obvious focus. They saw only an unremarkable woman watching training exercises, but military intuition suggested deeper significance. The way Mitchell watched her, with the intense attention usually reserved for high-value targets or distinguished visitors, marked her as someone important. The candidates themselves began performing differently under this undefined scrutiny. Some rose to the additional pressure, finding reserves of strength and determination they hadn't known they possessed. Others faltered, overwhelmed by the sense that their efforts were being evaluated by standards beyond normal selection criteria. Rodriguez moved closer to Mitchell, prepared to receive orders or guidance about the situation his commander had identified. 20 years of military service had taught him to read subtle signs that predicted action. The aftermath of recognition settled over the training ground like morning fog, subtle but transformative. Mitchell found himself viewing the entire selection process through different eyes, understanding that evaluation was occurring at multiple levels simultaneously. The woman's presence elevated routine training into something approaching operational assessment. Rodriguez finally approached within speaking distance, his voice pitched low to avoid disrupting the exercises. "Master Sergeant, is there something I should know about this morning's evolution?" His question carried the weight of professional concern mixed with curiosity about his commander's alter behavior. Mitchell considered his response carefully. Military protocol prohibited discussion of classified matters, but Rodriguez deserved some explanation for the obvious change in atmosphere. "Continue normal operations, Sergeant. Maintain standard evaluation procedures." His words were measured, designed to convey reassurance without revealing classified information. The woman began moving along the fence line, her path calculated to provide optimal observation angles of different training stations. Each position she chose demonstrated tactical understanding that confirmed Mitchell's assessment. She wasn't wandering randomly, but conducting systematic evaluation using principles taught in advanced reconnaissance courses. Several candidates were now performing beyond their documented capabilities, inspired by the indefinable sense that their efforts were being measured against extraordinary standards. The psychological impact of unidentified scrutiny often revealed character traits that normal evaluation missed. Some individuals rose to meet undefined challenges, while others cracked under imagined pressure. Mitchell documented these reactions in his mental assessment notes. Candidates who responded positively to unknown evaluation pressure possessed psychological resilience that might prove valuable in operational environments. Those who faltered demonstrated potential weakness under stress that could become liability during actual missions. The training evolution continued with mechanical precision, but underlying dynamics had shifted fundamentally. What began as routine candidate assessment had become multi-layered evaluation involving parties whose authority transcended normal command structure. The woman's presence transformed selection criteria from standard to exceptional. Other spectators sensed the change without understanding its source. Family members noticed the increased intensity among instructors, the heightened performance of some candidates, the electric tension that seemed to charge the morning air with significance beyond normal training activities. Through it all, the woman maintained her professional observation, her quiet presence serving as catalyst for transformation that would influence election outcomes in ways that would never appear in official reports, but would determine which candidates possessed the indefinable qualities required for missions that officially never happened. The broader implications of her presence began crystallizing in Mitchell's mind, like puzzle pieces falling into perfect alignment. This wasn't coincidence or casual observation. Someone at levels far above his pay grade had positioned one of the most classified operators in American military history to evaluate candidates for purposes that transcended normal selection criteria. The realization carried weight that settled in his chest like physical pressure. These candidates weren't just competing for spots in routine special operations units. They were being assessed for something that required the kind of judgment that only came from surviving the impossible. The woman's evaluation would influence decisions that might determine which of these men would face trials similar to Operation Silent Thunder. Mitchell understood now why her presence felt so significant. She represented the ultimate standard, the benchmark against which human performance was measured when everything else had failed. Her survival of conditions that killed her teammates qualified her to identify others who might possess similar resilience when tested beyond normal limits. The candidates themselves remained unaware of the true nature of their evaluation, but their instinctive responses to her presence revealed character traits that normal assessment couldn't measure. Some performed better under undefined pressure, while others showed signs of stress that might predict failure when facing genuine impossibility. Around the training ground, family members and other spectators continued their normal activities, unaware that history was being quietly written in their presence. The selection process that appeared routine was actually identifying individuals who might someday carry the same invisible burdens that the quiet woman by the fence had endured. Military service often demanded sacrifices that could never be publicly acknowledged. Operations that never appeared in history books. Heroism that remained forever classified. The woman's presence reminded Mitchell that some warriors served in shadows so deep that only their peers would ever recognize their contributions. The tattoo on her wrist represented bonds forged in conditions that few people could survive and fewer still could understand. It marked her as member of an exclusive brotherhood whose membership was earned through trials that left permanent scars on both body and soul. Her evaluation of these candidates was informed by experience that couldn't be taught in any school. Mitchell found himself viewing his own role differently. He wasn't just selecting special operations personnel, but identifying potential members of communities that existed beyond normal military structure. The woman's presence elevated his responsibility from administrative function to sacred trust. As the morning training evolution concluded, the woman prepared to leave with the same quiet efficiency that had marked her arrival. She moved away from the fence line without ceremony, her mission apparently complete. Whatever evaluation she had conducted was finished, her assessment recorded in memory rather than official documentation. Mitchell watched her departure with the same intensity he had observed her presence. She walked with purposeful stride that carried her quickly beyond the range of casual observation. Within minutes, she had disappeared into the parking area, leaving behind only the lingering sense that something significant had occurred. The candidates were dismissed to their barracks, exhausted but unaware that their performance had been measured against standards that transcended normal military evaluation. Some had unknowingly passed tests they didn't realize they were taking. Others had revealed character flaws that might influence their futures in ways they would never understand. Rodriguez approached Mitchell as the training ground emptied of spectators and candidates. The atmospheric tension that had charged the morning air was dissipating, but questions remained unasked and unanswered. Master Sergeant, should I expect any changes to our normal evaluation procedures? His tone suggested professional curiosity balanced against respect for classification boundaries. Mitchell considered his response carefully before shaking his head. Continue standard protocols, Sergeant. Today's observations will be incorporated into our regular assessment process. The non-answer satisfied protocol while acknowledging that something beyond routine had occurred. In the weeks that followed, selection results would reflect influences that never appeared in official documentation. Certain candidates would receive opportunities that seemed disproportionate to their documented performance. Others would find themselves redirected toward conventional units despite meeting apparent qualification standards. The invisible hand of evaluation, guided by experience beyond normal understanding, would shape careers and determine assignments in ways that preserved operational security while ensuring the right people found their way to the right missions. The woman's assessment would influence decisions made in rooms she would never enter by people she would never meet. Mitchell understood that he had witnessed something rare and significant: the intersection of classified operations and routine training, the moment when hidden histories influenced visible futures. Some warriors served in daylight, where their heroism could be celebrated. Others operated in shadows, where recognition came only from peers who understood the weight of sacrifice. The quiet woman had carried both burdens, serving in darkness while evaluating others who might follow the same path. Her presence reminded everyone who recognized her significance that true service often remained invisible, honored only in the silence between those who knew.